I try to focus less about the extraneous factors that we can't control, like what kind of funding environment are we in, and more on how do we continue to just create the best product, hit our goals, and grow momentum in the business.
This is Funded, a show where founders who raised millions in venture capital share the gritty side of what it actually took to get that money in the bank. I'm Jason Ye. Not too long ago, I was trying to get my ideas funded. And back in the day, I was a VC listening to founders pitch me for money. Most founders dream of disrupting an industry. But what do you do when disrupting an industry means you're going to have to build the entire infrastructure from the ground up? That's what Ron Belldegrun, founder CEO of ByHeart, and his co-founder Mia had to answer. Their vision to reinvent infant formula was far from simple. It required clinical trials, building manufacturing facilities, and defying the playbook that startups in the food and nutrition industry typically follow. Fundraising for something this ambitious was never going to be easy. Investors kept saying the same thing, just white label a product and get to market faster. But Ron and Mia weren't interested in shortcuts. They stuck to their vision, finding the kind of investors who believed in building something truly game-changing. That approach paid off. ByHeart has raised over $300 million to date, with their most recent round being a $95 million Series C led by D1 Capital Partners. Today, Ron gets real about what it took to raise capital for a business with a longer time horizon, the challenges of convincing investors in a tough market, and how they made history as the first new U.S. infant formula manufacturer in over 15 years. But before all that, we start at the very beginning, with Ron's upbringing in a family that inspired his entrepreneurial drive.
Yeah, so I grew up with three siblings, an older brother, an older sister, Mia, who I actually started ByHeart with. So she was my co-founder, and a little brother. So introvert, extrovert. When you have three brothers and a sister, it's all of the above. We were really, really close, and you know, I'd say somewhere in between. But grew up in really like also a life science household. My parents were both physicians initially, one oncologist and an ophthalmologist, and so science was all around me, and they ultimately kind of became actually entrepreneurs. So in the life science space, so developing companies and developing therapies for life-saving oncology, et cetera. So from really an early time in childhood, kind of I loved science, and that was kind of drove me, like a lot of people who are drawn to the sciences. That initially started as doctor, right? Was kind of the track. It's hard, I think, early on to appreciate like actually how many options there are, how much you can do with a passion for life science. And initially that took me to investing in life science, which I loved, which I could certainly talk more about, and grateful for that because ultimately that led to the genesis of ByHeart.
Awesome. So a lot of people that have that science background don't have the model to go after around what it means to be an entrepreneur, but you saw your parents do that. As you were coming up, I mean, you were in venture, but do you feel like you always had the thought that you would become an entrepreneur, or is that just something that landed in your lap later on?
I was an investor for just under a decade. I loved it, and it was really immersed in life science. And I think, have that inherent feeling, though, that I want to do something that drives change, that drives impact. I think I grew up in, particularly like when you grow up in a family of entrepreneurs within life science, it's very much a mentality of kind of like doing well by doing good and driving some major impact. So I think that always kind of lived in me. And as an investor, it was interesting because I stumbled upon, it was back in 2008, a company that developed ingredients for infant formula, right? And became very immersed in this space. I thought it was initially very fascinating. as an investor, but then start to follow this category. And I saw something really interesting, right? Where on one side, I'm looking at a category that creates literally the most important food in the world, right? Like for those who aren't parents, infant formula is literally sole source nutrition during the first year of life. Like this is where future health starts, right? This is when all of baby systems are developing. And I would sit on earnings calls and otherwise. And, this was a category that I would hear two companies speak about. I mean, it was dominated by the same companies for 50 years. And on a separate call, I would be talking to the medical community. And it is the most exciting time right now in nutrition science and breast milk research and food technology, and all of the tools are there. And so much energy is there to do much better than what's on the shelf today and really set babies up for a future of health. And it was kind of sitting in this fascinating conflict where that ultimately led to, after my time as investing, starting ByHeart with my sister. And I think what you refer to as like kind of the childhood and what you're rooted in, I think it was definitely that feeling of, hey, I want to do something impactful and I want to, apply these kind of over a decade of experience in this category and getting to know this space to actually driving impact and outcomes. So I think that definitely kind of surfaced in it.
Amazing. There's something about going to start your first company. Was this actually your first company, or did you have other things along the way?
This was my first company.
So there's something about starting your first company, I think, that is a bit of a benefit, and there's certainly downsides, which is this idea of like ignorance is bliss. Like you kind of don't really know what you're getting into, especially if you're starting a company that requires outside capital to actually get started. But in some ways, like you saw your parents as entrepreneurs, which the path of an entrepreneur and starting a company is never all up and to the right. So I'm sure you, at least in some form or fashion, saw your parents deal with some of the ups and downs. But more so as an investor for 10 years, I mean, I was an investor as well for 5 years. And there's something about seeing it from that side of the table where you're like, man, you know exactly how hard it is. You have a portfolio, right? The way the whole business model works is most of those things don't work out. And I think other listeners might not realize this, but there's this adage, or there's this understanding that you spend most of your energy and effort on the companies that aren't doing well. So you had this front row seat and understanding of what it was going to take. Do you remember, I mean, you talk a little bit about the information and the knowledge you needed to start this company, but I wonder if you could talk us through being with your sister and hearing the ideas that she had and being like, we should do this together, we should get started, knowing that, and maybe you can talk to it. ByHeart is a company that has a lot of sort of biomedical underpinnings, some real world requirements in terms of production. So it's something that's going to require a lot of capital from the outset. Do you remember that sort of feeling or conversation that was the thing that was like, I think we're going to do this?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. Yeah. So to give you some of the background, so me and I came at this from very different angles, right? So my background, as you know, is in investing, being immersed in this category for over 15 years. And it was really that experience I described where I was looking at this category and I knew that this was a moment where all the tools were available. We had characterized breast milk. We understood the components that drive their importance. We knew it better than we understood it better than we ever had in decades. Highest quality agriculture and ingredients were available. The experts were there. Like there was all of the tools available to do much better than what was on the shelf today. But all of that science was moving much faster than new products were getting to market, because appropriately, this is the most highly regulated food in the world, right? Yeah. This is the only food that requires FDA approval, clinical trials. The biggest bottleneck to getting into this category which unfortunately the world learned about in real time a couple of years ago during the nationwide infant formula shortage, was a supply chain. Like when we wanted to get into this space, there were 4 companies that manufactured infant formula. 3 own 90% of the market. They're not manufacturing for a new brand. And every new entrant in the last 20 years had taken the same expedited path, which is if you go to the one and only contract manufacturer in the country and you stay the same as their recipe from 15 years ago, if you stay the same as that, then you can skip the 5 years of work required by FDA to bring a really new formula to market, clinical trials, new factories, et cetera. The problem with that is you're referencing 15-year-old science. You can't change anything, and you're a marketing company. And so that was the moment that, like all entrepreneurs, we said, no, we're going to be able to go this one route and change the mentality and do something innovative. And you were met with a lot of, no, can't do that here. No, can't do that here. So it was a moment where Mia and I got together. And at that moment, it was a big decision point. And we decided, look, we're not here to slap a label on a can. We are here to actually translate these troves of advancements in nutrition science into better products. And we knew full well what it would take. From my background, both in investing and being immersed in this category for 15 years, as well as in, as you said, watching the path to entrepreneurialism in really highly regulated life science categories, we were not naive to what that would take, right? And Mia came at it from an angle of, she had been immersed in kind of CPG, digital technology, kind of business development. And her mentality was a really inspiring one, which from her perspective, she said, hey, if our mission really is to make all parents feel amazing in how they nourish their baby, no matter how they feed, it's not actually enough to just make a better product. We actually have to create a platform where we are making accessible all of the information that arm parents with the best decision for themselves. So when we say, our product delivers, the most important benefits to babies. Okay, show me the 300 baby clinical trial. It's data. Here's what we did. You make the decision for yourself. Or when we say highest quality, here's our farm to formula supply chain. We own it end to end. Here are supply standards. Here are suppliers. Here's the information. And ultimately you decide for yourself. And so it was sort of this coming together of sort of Mia's backgrounds and my backgrounds that ultimately came into this moment of, hey, the only way to innovate in this space is to literally build from scratch, buy your own factories, build a whole supply chain, run 300 baby clinical trials. And, that was a 6-year journey, but we were committed and we brought the best people around us to, live their entire lives in this category to really help drive that mission. And, with our launch in 2022, we became the first new infant formula manufacturer in over 15 years. But that was definitely the moment that we kind of needed to decide, because that was the trajectory defining moment.
Yeah. And it would be easy for me to jump forward from here, but I kind of want to pull this apart because there's a lot of things to get your reactions to. I mean, so it does sound like you all thought about what was in front of you. And, I just want to paint this picture a little bit more clearly for others. It's like there is this jump in 2 feet first moment for a lot of founders. They're like, they find their co-founder, they're like thinking that they want to raise capital. But in the worlds that I live in, mostly it's been in software, things that can be prototyped very easily, that can be tested with customers. MVP can go out. You can learn, oh, this direction wasn't right. We're going to go in this direction. And given your background, you knew exactly what that was going to take. Like there had to be a longer term view on what you were getting into and how long this would take. And then the additional thing is like how many points of failure there are along the way before you can even, get to that point that a lot of software-based founders get to. But you're jumping into that eyes wide open. And at least if Mia, right? Mia?
Yeah.
If Mia didn't have the first-hand experience, you were able to communicate that with her. There's a second point I wonder if you could comment on, which is the co-founder dynamic of such a close relationship, right? There is, I think there are multiple schools of thought in investing. You probably have your own. You probably have been colored starting ByHeart with Mia about like what you thought about these things. But I remember at Greycroft, we talked about partners, either romantic partners or like actually married couples being co-founders and the pros and cons of that. There are a lot of VCs that really don't like seeing that. Like there's something about it, the inherent conflict that goes into starting and running a company, and just the additional relationship and what communication is like. At Greycroft, early on, the firm happened to back a really successful husband and wife duo. So you're colored by that. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about going into business with your sibling, what that entailed and what you kind of had to think about as you carved out roles for each other. And then because of the topic that we lean into, what did that mean for talking to investors? And did that ever come up in the early days?
Yeah, great question. So starting with your first question on kind of the jump at 2 feet moment, because it's actually related to your second question.
Sure, I imagine.
Yeah, you're right. This was no ordinary consumer category, right? Like the types of conversations we were having 6 years ago was sitting down with, to your point, investors that are used to like, hey, get to an MVP and how's it go? Show me some product market fit. And then, let's talk about it later on a little bit of capital to de-risk. We were having conversations that went something like, hey, we're going to buy a factory before we started a clinical trial that may or may not be positive. Probably 6 years before we're going to generate $1 of revenue. And you can imagine that that's not a very easy conversation with a consumer investor. It's all relative, right? Because in our cap table, on our board, and represented in our team is both life science investors and life science people with deep experience who have built, vertically integrated life science companies and understand what it takes to build a quality first, innovative, R&D driven kind of organization. And so there was good buy-in and understanding from a group like that. And on the consumer side, this really self-selected for a really consumer investor that was willing to break mandate in some ways, go whether it's, cash flow negative for as long as it would be, or whether it's, clinical binary risk or other things, because they were so sort of bought into and motivated by the mission and the vision. So early on, that was, and had always been kind of a challenge, right? Because you're kind of breaking mandate in so much for investors. But I think actually it's one of the probably most important things, because it's built this really sticky, committed to the vision group of investors that bring both sides of what the company needs to be successful, which has been really helpful for us as we've gone along the way. But because that journey here is so long and difficult, and it's not for the faint of heart, I actually think, going to your question number 2, starting a company with your sister was actually incredible. I mean,
is Mia older or younger?
She's older. So
even better.
Yeah, exactly. We've been best friends our whole lives. Like there's no trust like that of, with your sister in my case, thankfully. And what we're doing is hard. It was not a straight line. As I said, it's not for the faint of heart. So taking it on together was, I think, really important. Beyond that, we brought very different perspectives and I think skill sets, right? I don't know that a sibling company would always work. Like if it's your expertise is the same thing, I could see how that would be tricky. I think in the case of Mia and I, it works really well because we came at it from different angles with different strengths, which are really complementary to each other. And actually, in kind of a funny way, actually like represent this category. Like the problem with the category has kind of been, you have either these kind of big conglomerates that are creating infant formula, and like with a title even like infant formula, like parents view it as, they don't view it as a food. They don't view it as as a product. It's not often. And there is a intimacy to this decision. Like it's the first decision you make as parents. that is critically important. It's a consumer category. It's not a pharmaceutical category. On the other side, there's more consumer brands that have tried to get into this category, but all of them until us had effectively taken this path to white label a product. And so there isn't necessarily the expert, kind of the deep R&D innovation and really kind of 21st century science, clean discrete things that we've brought to this category. And so it's sort of, in some ways, infant formula is a life science category, a consumer category. And I think what's special that we built is that kind of diversity of thought under one roof, right?
Yeah.
Deep people that are committed their lives to infant nutrition next to people who all they think about is how can we be the most parent-centric brand and really speak to our consumer in a direct way and really understand what they need, and then translate that back actually to our innovations to innovate for them. So in some ways in this situation, I don't know if it always works. I don't have global advice on would I start a company with a sibling, but in our case, it worked really well, I think for all these reasons, and lent that kind of, I think, much needed camaraderie and support in what, is a tough path in this category.
Honestly, like, play on words, I guess, but like a little bit more heart in your company, if you will. So I can't tell by Crunchbase exactly when initial funding came in, but you started the company in around 2018, 2019. Is that right?
We started the business in basically mid 16. I think we formally listed Jan of 17. So it's been, nearly 8 years now.
Okay. And so, your initial rounds of funding must have been around, 2017. Like, you have to invest a certain amount of capital into it. We start seeing announced rounds, and maybe it's all bundled together, but something in 2019, close to $20 million. And where I want to accelerate this is to your most recent round of capital that got announced in, $95 million, I believe. There's something interesting that you said that I'm going to try to bridge the gap here, which is you had this idea that there is better science to be applied to this most important food source in the very early days of a baby's life. But there's also a consumer brand, there's a consumer experience, there's like giving the tools and knowledge to parents to be able to use this new nutrition in the best possible way, which means, yes, you had some life science investors along the way, but you were able to get some consumer investors to break mandate, to understand that they needed this longer horizon and expectation around the path that ByHeart was going to take. Now, in my own experiences being involved with companies, started investing in 2012, have had a big active role across COVID, now to an interesting part of the market. There was a part of the market that you were able to raise capital in, which was very risk aggressive, very the market was growing. Usually we want to see companies get into market in 6 months. These guys seem awesome. This seems like a big idea. Let's invest. Yeah, long horizon. But what I found, because I've been involved in companies, is that the last year and a half has been a completely big shift in terms of how investors think about putting capital to work. I've been quoted as saying, the pendulum swung one way when we had ZERP access to capital and people were like, let's try this, let's do this. And I think the pendulum is swinging and over correcting in a certain way where people are like, profitability today, when is break even, within a year, et cetera. And so I wonder if we can talk, let's fast forward now. You announced your round relatively recently, which means you were probably raising capital in 2023. If we have to remind ourselves what's happened in 2023, markets are bottoming out. SVB collapsed in the early parts of the years. So I wonder if you can talk about what it meant to, one, think about, we actually did what we said we were going to do. I believe you started hitting your marks, but all of a sudden now you need to go raise capital in a very different market. So maybe you can talk a little bit about the environment that you want to go raise capital in.
I loved hearing Ron's take on working with a sibling as a co-founder. It's definitely not the right move for everyone, but when you're signing up for a long haul to build and scale in an industry that's been locked down for decades, maybe having family, someone who knows you better than anyone else, is exactly what you need to get it done. After the break, we'll hear what it was like to raise ByHeart's Series B in one of the tougher markets the VC industry has ever seen. There are a ton of easy to make mistakes when growing a startup. I feel like I've either made them all myself or seen them all as an advisor and investor. One super common one is waiting too long to bring in expert help around managing company finances. I get why that happens though. You're not a tiny company anymore, but you feel like you're not big enough to have an in-house finance team and don't want to waste money. My advice to you is to avoid the mistake of just winging it. This is not a time to fake it till you make it. At least talk to someone early so that you can hear about how the additional help could actually save you money and improve your operations. If you're looking for recommendations on who to talk to, check out Propeller Industries. They've worked with hundreds of venture to growth stage startups, so have a ton of deep knowledge to help you avoid major bumps and set your company up for success, whether it's talking to investors or planning for future growth. Set up a free call by going to fundedpod.com/propeller. That's PROPELLER, and tell them we sent you. They're giving Funded listeners a one-time $2,500 new client credit if you work with them for 3 months.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think you're absolutely right. I mean, it's been it's as an investor in my old life, there's always these cycles, right? And so I think probably that experience has also lent itself to my currency in that I try to focus less about the extraneous factors that we can't control, like what kind of funding environment are we in, and more on how do we continue to just create the best product, hit our goals, and grow momentum in the business. Because I think in whatever market you're in, there is access to capital for businesses that are doing something game changing and are hitting their marks, right? And so I think that's where we've tried to be focused. I mean, in this particular case, in your question, I mean, I think we felt there was a lot of momentum going into this raise, right? We had started to grow our numbers in terms of just our experience in market, our time in market, quite a lot. And I think the thing as a founder that gave me the most confidence and kind of that I get most excited about is really that of feedback and reception to the product. Right? We were hearing from parents that they loved this product. We were seeing that the kind of things that we saw in our clinical trial, like clinically proven easy digestion and less spit up and softer stools and all these benefits we had driven, we were starting now to hear that and see that from parents, right? So said another way, 50% of babies typically switch formula because they can't digest or tolerate it well. We were seeing less than 1% complaints, on really big numbers out in market. And so we're starting to get this feedback, these really strong testimonials that was telling us that this was a product that parents really liked. We didn't even cover this yet, but after 6-7 years of development, we launched with one manufacturing facility, which we thought would be, plenty of capacity for several years. And then a month later, there was a nationwide shortage of infant formula. We found ourselves as one of 5 companies in the country supporting this critically important food. This had always been a purpose-driven business, but all of a sudden our purpose had never felt this important when we're hearing directly online, direct to consumer from parents driving state to state, not being able to find sole source nutrition for their babies, which had never happened anywhere. But we were all of a sudden in the mode of both kind of trying to play our role in the industry as one of 5 to really build more infrastructure and more supply. And at the same time, seeing really strong and positive reception from this product. And so last year was really a year about actually doubling down on the supply chain. We went out, we bought 2 more factories. We got both of those factories FDA registered as new infant formula manufacturing facilities in this country. And to your question, all of that requires, of course, capital. And so where we were focused was on really that the business, right? Like bringing up these two factories, we were really proud to have been the first, kind of the only company to bring on new incremental factories into this critically important supply chain.
Yeah.
And that really kind of reception from parents that this was a product that parents really loved. I think those two things together, was what I focused on when I thought about, is this a time that we can go out and raise capital? It's more, kind of looking inwards versus looking outwards. I guess was what I'd say.
No, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And even as I see the cadence for when some of your rounds were announced, it feels like you probably had an acceleration driven by those infant formula shortages, where you were like one of the most amazing saviors in the world, for providing this. And so you raised in the announced rounds were like in end of or middle of 2020, again in 2021, hottest market in the world. It did seem like you were hitting your marks, but I wonder if you remember along this last raise of $95 million, going back to consumer-based, consumer-focused investors or any of the others, and you had to have started getting no's. Did you remember any of the no's that came through and what it felt like, even though you thought you were hitting your marks?
Yeah, look, there's in every round, there's always no's, there's always yeses. The people you think are going to lead the round don't end up leading the round. Like there's always the, twists and turns of raising. I think
And any particularly painful ones that come to mind?
I don't know if it's painful. I actually think I think you learn something from each of the no's, like I actually think like one of the biggest advice I'd give founders is like have the phone call after the no as to why the no, and some of those things you'll learn from. Some of those things will give you more conviction in what you're doing. I'll tell you, like one of the most popular no's of 5 or 6 years ago was investors would say to us like, I don't get it. Like, why would you go out and buy a factory, run major clinical trials, do all this work? You could be on market in a year if you just go the standard path and white label product. Like, will parents even tell the difference? Like, can you make similar claims? And our fundamental belief was, yes, parents will tell the difference. Like, this is the most inspiring audience. Like, they are digging. Like, you would not believe the questions that we get about our product. And it's cool. Parents want to do right by their babies. They really want the information. They're hungry for it. And so our approach was one of, and you could call us obsessive, right? Like there's some companies that are great at marketing. There's some companies that are great at making products. Like we wanted to make the best infant formula in the world, and we were obsessive about it. We wanted to own our entire manufacturing supply chain so we could handpick every ingredient, hold every supplier to the highest standards in the industry, to really obsess over our quality. We wanted to run major clinical trials. So we're not a company about claims. We're a company about evidence. We did the largest study in over 25 years from a new brand that showed real breakthrough benefits. Like that to us, we felt was core. And if we could deliver that and we could deliver a great experience for parents, then marketing and all that would follow. That is not the belief that many investors held 6, 7 years ago. And that's okay. There's different mandates and there's different things, but they weren't in our cap table. And now in hindsight, like we know that, owning the supply chain, doing it the way we did, enabled everything I think we were able to accomplish. And is the only way to actually make a better product. But you doubt yourself along the way, right? So like there's of course questions, from you hear consumer investor after consumer investor, hey, great story, but I don't take clinical trial risk, or great story, but you buy a factory, it's going to take you time to utilize that factory, or all the things. And I think, founders need to stay really true to their mission, what they believe is going to drive value for parents in our case, or customers and others. And not every investor is going to agree with you. So I think that's a kind of, one of the things I would say. But I think in our case, just to get back to your question, I think in our case, we've been very fortunate because, as I spoke to earlier, this idea that early on we needed to self-select, like it's self-selected for these really committed investors.
Yeah.
Our existing investors have been incredibly supportive. Like we're so grateful. Like none of this would have happened without such support from them, both the life science ones and the consumer ones that have participated in every round, added in every round, have helped lead to rounds that had significant demand. And so we're grateful for that. So it's all about, I think, who's in that cap table as well is a big component, obviously, of all of this, probably one of the most important.
Yeah. I mean, these later stage rounds have been harder to raise. I mean, in the last year. So hearing that you had momentum along the way is like kind of heartwarming. It's like, I also feel like there's always like a shred of doubt. I think even if you're extremely confident, because there's always something that can happen. In fact, like over the last 4 years, there have been more than one black swan event, like that people could not have experienced or expected. But at some point, you know, there is this feeling of momentum that you guys hit where it's like, and it might have happened quickly for you, but when you were raising this round, I imagine, especially, even with someone who has experience now with raising your own rounds, but having been a venture capitalist for all these years, it's like, exactly how to run your process. You know exactly what you're going to do. You have the materials, you have the data room ready, you know what the story is, but there is always this feeling like, will it happen? Can we get the cards to the line? Will another global pandemic break out in the middle of our fundraise? Will bank shut down? But then there is also this thing that kind of like shifts where the momentum starts hitting. Is there something that you felt along the way where it was like, oh my gosh, this is happening. This is happening. This is going to be a great round. Anything you can point to?
I think it's a combination of the momentum that you referenced and we discussed, like, I think starting to take hold, like the reception of the product, the growth of the product, the successful achievement of registration for 2 new factories in a very short amount of time, relaunching out of a 3-site supply chain. I think some of these things are, of course, like the milestones you try to focus on and achieve as a business. But I think where that kind of feeling ultimately came from that you're referring to of this is happening was, as I kind of said, just the existing investors being extremely supportive, right? So I think this was a round of really supported by the existing investors getting in and wanting to kind of double down and continue to support the business, which is really unique. I appreciate, but it's I think a testament to kind of their dedication, their commitment, their vision, which is wonderful. And so
was it an early conversation before you even started the round with a lead investor? I don't know if you can comment on who it was, but like, was it an early conversation where we're like, we just want to do this with you, like let's fill it out, or was it like, we want you to start raising and then we're gonna like support you, or we're gonna come in and be like, you know what, we're gonna take a lead position here?
Yeah, I mean, it's I guess the leads have been, we've done a number of rounds and the kind of leads have been often, and the kind of existing investors have been such substantial investors in every round that I think in this past round, there was sort of no difference in those conversations, but it's always a process, right? Where of course, there was some external groups that came alongside, and it's always an evolving thing. What we were really focused on always with our raises, and again, you've been, I think, fortunate to have significant demand for the rounds that we've done. That we've always focused on who are the people, that are investing in the business, because, as I said, by not being like such a clear mandate business, it really requires people being bought into the bigger vision here of what we're doing. And we really focused on the group. And so, our existing investors, span from, as we said, life science to consumer, to really dedicated food investors, to impact investors, and really investors that across every pillar of our business really align on a values perspective and mission perspective as well. So I think that's what's created a certain, I think, confidence and strength going into these rounds. But it's raising is always curves, right? So
That's awesome. It's always great to hear about founders who have such strong cap tables and such strong supporters within their investing group. You've now like raised multiple rounds of capital, 9 figures of capital. And so closing rounds maybe feels old hat to you. But even that response would be interesting to hear when the money hit the bank, right? Like you can get commitments, you can get term sheets and whatever. There's still a process to herd the cats and get people to wire. When that like final additional big chunk of money came in, like, what did you do with Mia? Is there a celebration ritual you have now, or is it just another blip in a day?
Yeah. It's funny, a lot of people say like, oh, when you're raising, like that's the hard work, and then like, celebrate, like once the money hits the bank, that's where the work starts.
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know, and showing you're deploying it correctly. But look, a lot of hard work goes into these, and it's across the board because of, a lot of members of our team participate in these, because I would say that of everything we've accomplished at ByHeart, I'd say our proudest achievement is the team that we've built. And so we put a lot of our team in front of investors during our rounds. And not because I'm doing our team a favor, but actually because they are driving the outcome. I mean, investors, you were one, you know this. I mean, investors are investing in a team and in people. And
yeah.
so it's all to say it's a big effort across the board. In our case, there are some companies that, it's really confined to a couple people that really run the process, and sure, certainly falls heavier on some groups than others. But in our case, we're exposing our chief medical officer, our chief quality officer, our head of operations, our supply chain leads, as well as, our teams that are focused on our consumer all the time. And so it's a broad group that, prospective and existing investors get, to get access to, because we welcome the diligence, right? Like, I think the more diligence that a team does, the more they get to know the company and really vet, like, is this the right fit? And we also do a lot of our reverse diligence, because like we want the right people in the group. So we certainly take the beat and take the minute to celebrate, and go for a good lunch or something like that together, because it takes a lot of the team's effort, and I mean, and we're grateful for that. And really, it's to show appreciation, because I've said to them many times. I mean, it's you know investors getting excited about this story is really like them believing in and getting to know our team.
Yeah. I love a lot of what you just said, and there's something in there that I want to underline for other people, and it's your response to diligence, which is something that I help other founders realize that they need to get to before they go fundraise. A lot of people can feel on edge or anxious and not sure. And look, no company is perfect. There are things that are um, maybe problem areas of the company or things that you're working on. But I think the best companies are excited about the diligence. They want the opportunity to show off the different parts of their company. And even the things that maybe aren't in the best place, like it's your opportunity to show your excitement. Like, it's exactly what we're working on here. Like, this is the one thing that's going to get better. And the fact that your team is such a big part of that story makes all the sense in the world why you've been so successful raising capital for ByHeart. I wonder if you could share a little bit about, with this newest tranche of capital, like, what are you most excited to deploy this capital to do? What should consumers in the marketplace expect to see from you over these next couple of years?
Yeah, for us, it's pretty simple. It's, first of all, making this product just as broadly accessible as possible.
Yeah.
Well, that's been a big focus for the business. I mean, this is infant nutrition. This is foundational health. Part of the long process we took was to, vertically integrating, et cetera, was to enable building a, you know, nationally accessible brand, one that brought up the value of the product, latest nutrition science, highest quality ingredients, all metal and fully recyclable container, but at rough parity pricing with the shelf. And so one of the things that we get really excited about is to see that, every single day, 90% of the states in the country are ordering online, and, across nationwide retail in 1,800 stores, we're seeing over 90% of stores scanning. It's kind of to more of that, right? More making sure that this product is broadly accessible. Number one, making sure that we're continuing to innovate to our R&D teams and our innovation teams are very active. Like our kind of belief internally is the work never ends. We learn more and more about, breast milk and nutrition science every year, and we want to continue to innovate. So that's another obviously focus of the round. So, and so I'd say those are kind of the main focus areas. Some of the rounds that we had done in the past, a lot of that was to support, doubling down on the supply chain, building, kind of this end-to-end manufacturing network with redundancy, with resilience, with, as one of 5 companies in the country, that was really important. This round is really about continuing to create more access to the product and continuing to innovate.
That was my episode with Ron Belldegrun, co-founder and CEO of ByHeart, a better formula for formula. I hope hearing Ron's journey helped you see that even the toughest industries with the biggest barriers can be challenged. Whether you're fundraising, scaling, or trying to break into a lockdown market, there's a lot to learn from the way he stayed committed to his mission. When we come back, we'll hear from my producer, Paige, about what she thought about this conversation. Like many of you, my last venture-backed startup was a SaaS business. In that company early on, we had the opportunity to sell into a large enterprise, but ran into some walls when they asked us if we were SOC 2 certified. Not only were we not certified, we also found out that it would take our small team a ton of time to get that done, and so we ended up abandoning the deal. If you haven't run into a situation like that where a potential customer or investor is asking if you're SOC 2, HIPAA, GDPR, or ISO 27001 certified, you probably will soon. But unlike me, you could use a company called Vanta to help. Vanta helps automate up to 90% of the compliance work, getting you audit ready in weeks rather than months, and eliminating up to 85% of the costs. Not only that, but Vanta can start small with you and scale up as you grow, helping you land bigger deals and earn customer trust. The best part is, Vanta is offering funded listeners $1,000 off for going to vanta.com/funded. That's VANTA.com/funded for $1,000 off your service. Check it out.
Hello, Jason. This was a very, very cool episode.
Yeah, it was slightly different on a number of elements, right? I liked it a lot.
Yeah, I know. I feel like, I think we've had a few, maybe a handful of people on that have gotten to more of their Series A round. I feel like we typically focus on the pre-seed or seed because that's such a defining moment for a startup as to figure out if they are venture backable or not. But it's also cool from time to time to hear from founders that have raised now, for example, for ByHeart, hundreds of millions of dollars, having just closed recently their $95 million Series C. There's so many now. So it was very cool to get to talk to him and learn more about the business. And besides that differentiating factor, he's also in an industry that we don't get to hear from much, So overall, it was very cool. And I did have some topics I wanted to touch on and kind of try to bring them back to earlier stages.
Yeah, I will just say I do love that earliest battle to try to find capital. It's so it's the launching point for so many companies. And I think we do a relatively good job of telling the story of man, that is so hard. But I think the other thing people don't realize is that it kind of doesn't get easier. I think some people think that with the business taking off and the business, doing revenue and having customers that, wow, this is going to be so much easier now. But I think investors' expectations just keep growing from round to round. So you're always trying to convince an investor of some sort of future version of yourself that today is uncertain. And that's always going to be challenging no matter where you are in your life cycle.
Yeah. And back to the focus of this industry that they're in, which is quite interesting. For them, it was, even though now they're at their Series C, they are tackling something really tough here because it's so locked down by a few, I think he said 5 people or 5 different companies total, which is insane. The whole country is locked down by 5 companies. So them trying to build from the ground up, which is something that was kind of their differentiating factor, I guess, and something that some investors liked and some investors didn't like, was very interesting to me. Like, so, and I kind of want to talk about that for a second. So
Yeah.
they decided to own every piece of the process from factories. They wanted to get a clinical trial that hasn't been done in forever, and they wanted to control everything, which I think is awesome. But it's also risky, you know, when you're dealing with a market that's so hard to get into, because those things take a lot of time. So I
Yeah.
don't know. I kind of wanted to pick your investor brain, and hear some of your thoughts or opinions around why investors at first might have thought it was a little risky, and why someone might have been drawn, like kind of like the pros and the cons to each side of that coin.
Yeah, and just to take a step back there too, I think that illustrates a common occurrence when it comes to fundraising. It's like you're telling a story and you talk to equally credible people, and a group of them will be like, this is crazy and idiotic. Why would you ever use this as your strategy? And another group would be like, brilliant. Like, that's the way you should do it. And that's kind of like the razor's edge that you're always on when it comes to fundraising, is like telling this story that's crazy to some people, but like brilliant to others. In this case, I can generalize it a little bit. An investor is always looking to see like, how risky is this thing that they're saying they're going to do? Do we believe these people can do it? And what's the payoff for that risk that they're taking on? And look, you know, when you say, I want to build everything from the ground up and I want to do something that people have never done before, the payoff is like, look, we will be such a unique product that no one else will be able to compete with because we do it this different way. That payoff seems interesting, right? Now, the risk is tough. Had Ron and Mia ever gone through these like crazy clinical trials for baby formula? No. Had they ever built a manufacturing facility in the past before? No. And so like, these risks are real. And I think it's an investor's job, or the investors that were evaluating this deal, the investor's job is to think about like, okay, what is that crazy version of the world that they're thinking about? Would it actually create a huge amount of value and differentiation and competitive advantage in order to be able to own a part of a market that is already, like we said, controlled by 5 incumbents? That could be amazing. And if some people were like, that's amazing, then when they look at the risks of like, have these guys ever done it before? Now let's like dive into, do we think Ron's crazy enough to be able to get this done? Like, does he have enough resilience? Do they have an attachment to the direction, the North Star of this company, to want to keep like pushing down walls to get this done? And you kind of like take all of that together, and half of the people will be like, I don't think they can do it. And by the way, the payoff isn't that good. And the other half, or, you know, a portion will go, there's a chance they could get this done. And if they get this done, there's a huge prize at the end of that.
Yeah.
Let's go do it.
Yeah.
And I think that's what they ran into, and what they ended up figuring out.
Yeah, because there really is, like, when you look at it, risk either way. They could have not built it from the ground up, and then the product might have ended up being not the quality that they wanted, and then the brand would have went to crap. Or, you know, they do build the product from the ground up, and in their case, it ended up being something like revolutionary to a lot of parents, at least, like in the feedback that they got that built the brand that they had. So in this case, they ended up, those investors early on ended up taking a good bet, which is
and I'll just say too, by the way, like, no path is certain, right? Like, just like you said, there are variables down different paths and outcomes that can't be predicted. And part of it is, you know, betting on the jockey to ride the horse to the right outcome. And, you know, it seems like these investors have picked a good one so far.
Yeah. That just made me think of something too, of like, maybe it's not necessarily about the specific, I think you've said this before too, but the specific thing that the founder wants to do, but you really are just betting on the founder. Because if there was a determined founder that was like, I am gonna white label and you know, not build from the ground up, and I'm determined to do it, and they saw something in his eyes to do it, he could create just as successful of a company doing that than like building from the ground up.
A lot of times, I'll usually say this from an earlier stage company perspective, when people are like, here's my product idea and here's my strategy and I want to go raise capital. A lot of times the strategy that you describe to the investor is less about the specific strategy
and more about just a representation about how this founder thinks. It's just another thing to help
Yep.
you evaluate how good you think this founder is. Because in your head, you're like, it's going to change. No way is that actually going to be the thing that ends up being the big success story. But I want to know what you think about what the strategy should be today. And that helps me evaluate whether or not I think you're amazing. And look, I think that continues to be the case as you push further and further later and later stages. Obviously, the strategies don't go and do 180-degree turns and pivots the same way they do at the pre-seed or the seed.
Yeah.
But you're still like, look, at the end of the day, it could have to change. And we're still just betting on a founder being amazing and bringing us to the promised land.
Yeah. Something else that I kind of wanted to shift to is something that Ron shared that him and Mia both care about, and is, I think, I don't want to quote him incorrectly, but is the most valuable part about their company is their team. Like, that's the thing that they're the most proud of. And so that being said, something they decided to incorporate into their fundraising process throughout, I think, multiple rounds is kind of introducing investors to their team. And I wanted to get your thoughts on that, because I'm not sure if this is a common practice or not, but it was something important specifically to these founders that lit them up, that maybe investors recognized and saw as a green flag. And I just kind of wanted to get your opinion on that, or if you've heard about people incorporating other people into the fundraising process outside of the founders.
Yeah, look, I think the cliche of team is everything is grounded in a lot of truth. And a lot of times you'll see investors that just see amazing teams and they'll be like, we want to back this team doing anything, right? If they like working together, if they complement each other, if they bring out the best in each other, then that's going to be a team that can do a lot, pointed in any direction. And I think in the earliest stages, the most important parts of the team are the co-founding team, because they are the most locked into the opportunity, and they are driving the most of the outcome for many, many rounds. I'd say as you get later stage, and if you get deeper into a fundraising process, there is a lot of opportunity to show the different assets that your company already has. So probably introducing more of your product than you might in the pre-seed, probably introducing different elements of your company. And I don't know if it's like a must for teams to present different parts of their, founders to present different members of their team during a fundraise. But certainly during a diligence process, or as you get deeper into a fundraise, a venture capital firm is going to want to know who's your head of technology for software companies. And I think in ByHeart's case, like probably head of marketing, understanding who's driving the marketing motion behind the company, and head of science and production is probably very important to understand all that. But I do think ByHeart and Ron and Mia probably gave it their own spin in terms of like really, really wanting it to be part of the fundraising story of how amazing their team was, how deeply integrated they were with each other. So I think there are a lot of different ways to do it. Team will come up in a lot of pitches, but probably not to the extent that the ByHeart team.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's got to be a great signal, because clearly, when you're proud of something, you are confident in it, which kind of leads me to my next topic, which you guys had a good conversation around in the episode, which was this idea of diligence, and how Ron's opinion on it was like, please diligence us in and out, like look into everything, ask questions, whatever. And that just shows the level of confidence he has in his team and his company as a whole. And I just feel like that's something maybe not everyone has, maybe going into the earlier rounds. I kind of want to hear your thoughts about it. But in my head, it's like, okay, if there's something that you are unsure about, or, you don't feel confident in, then maybe that's something that you really should look at before you go out to do anything, because
I think that's the right answer. And you're not even saying if your company isn't perfect, then you should make it perfect before you go fundraise. It really is, you got to know about all parts of your business. You got to understand the strategy going forward, and you got to know what are the things that need to be worked on, right?
no company, no business is perfect. It's more of that realization of what elements are not perfect, what things you can do to make things better, and what is the plan and strategy going forward. I think it's akin to my advice around questions you get asked in a live pitch where people are like drilling you about what is this? What is that? Do you know this answer? Do you know this answer? Do you have the perfect answer for this versus that? And in both the questions you get asked live in a live pitch and the diligence that someone might do offline to dig into your company, in both cases, you just have to be really confident with what you have and understand what's there. If they run into something in diligence that they don't like, it can't be a surprise to you. It's got to be something that you're aware of and something that you're open to discussing. If it's something that is a kiss of death, like terrible thing that you can't get around, then maybe you shouldn't be fundraising until you figure out what the plan is to fix that, because you have to expect everything to come out in a fundraise. If you're betting on and rolling the dice that during your fundraising process, this one terrible thing about your company isn't going to come out, and that's what has to happen in order for you to get funded, it's probably not a good strategy. So I do love the idea that Ron is like, look, we welcome it. We can't wait for you to learn more about our company because we think our company is that good. That's the type of confidence that like everyone should have as they're going into talking to investors at any stage.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Snaps to that. Is that the debrief?
That is the debrief.
Let's go.
If you're looking for more insights, strategies, and support around fundraising, subscribe to our newsletter. It's at fundedpod.com/newsletter. And find me on social. I'm at JayYeh, that's JayYeh on almost every platform. I respond to DMs and newsletter replies, so hit me up. This episode was produced by Paige Randall.
Hey guys.
Thanks also to John O'Lee from Adamant.
Hey everyone.
And as always, one last thanks to our sponsor, Vanta, the leading automated security and compliance platform.